Holy Wisdom, Holy Word. It's been a while. Hope you're all well. Spent the day at the beach. Like a lot of hours at the beach. And I thought I'd pop on and let's start the day of just this moment. This is all we have. Got the candles lit. I've had a wonderful moment in the beach. I did a little painting, just so you know. It's really fun. I haven't watercolored in a while, but it was just a perfect day. And I spent the day kind of reading on this book, Alex Jack. And Holy Wisdom, Holy Word, I'm going to read out of John Philip Newell, the Book of Creation. And I'm going to read out of Poverty and Joy. This is my beautiful Franciscan brother, William Short. He's an amazing professor. I'm hoping to study with him this next year. And I've been thinking about Alex's book. So I took some notes on a section that I really thought we'd talk about tonight. So I took all these notes as I start looking at spiralarity. I started this probably, I don't know, it was 8 months ago or so. I started thinking about what would it take for us to understand the spiral of life, the gifts of life. And catapult wisdom was one of the ideas, because I think during COVID, we need to look at what we're putting into our children's ears, what we're putting into our idea every day. And what comes out here is really important. What you should do, like really what we as a human being, as adults, could be a lot more adult-like, especially with the landscape that we have here in America. But it's also global. Spiralarity moves, I wrote, faster into the center and slower out to the outer. And Alex went into a couple of really cool ideas. It's the arc that bends, he says, for justice, peace, and love. So we're going to talk about that tonight. But one of the things that I loved him sharing was the idea of a logarithmic spiral and understanding the relationship between yin and yang, the expansive and contraction. We've talked a lot about this over the course of my studies, and as many of you know, it's I just graduated in May with a Master of Divinity, and I've studied a lot of theologians, but I call Alex Jack a deep theologian of our time. But Michio Kushi really made a difference, and this paragraph really spoke to me, so I thought I'd talk about it. Michio taught that cosmic and terrestrial evolution can be understood as a dynamic movement from contraction to materialization to expansion of spiritualization. In each stage, he explains that there is a logarithmic relationship in which yin, or expansive energy, stands in the dynamic ratio of yang, the contractive energy. His model of history bears some affinity with the 12-spoked wheel of time in Indian thought. So I don't know this idea of Indian thought, that measures the world ages in alternating ascending and descending arcs. Ascending and descending. But the Hindu and Buddhist versions tend to have recurring cycles with fixed periods, while Michio's spiralic and dynamic or flex. Michio's is spiralic and dynamic and flexible. So I studied this a long time. This is a spiral on top of our head. There's spirals on top, our fingerprints are spirals, the bottom of our feet. So energy, our sexual organs, energy comes into the body in the feminine and out of the body for a masculine, but both the ovaries have that spiralic relationship, and same with the masculine, with the testicles. And you have to look at it from a very practical understanding. So when we think about the intellect, I got thinking about this idea of linear thinking and how much of this universe right now is linear. I'm gonna blow my candle because I've got a little glass here, so I send you a little bit of light. And I've got my other candle. My Mary candle has been lit quite a bit this week. So when I started thinking about catapulting wisdom and what we're facing as a group of society, as a society in general, as COVID, really kind of equalized the playing field globally. The borders got changed just because we all experienced the same pandemic, right? So our borders, our relationship to our borders changed. And what I really think, when things come to us naturally, also things move from us naturally. So if you're attracting COVID or you're not attracting COVID, this is a movement of, contraction, expansion. And I've been thinking a little bit about that through Francis and Jesus and Mohammed. When you think of the idea of spiritual leaders, spiritual ideas of our time, we have Gandhi, we have Martin Luther King, we have Kushi. I've been reading some of the Pope's encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, and his encyclical letter, he wrote a lot about St. Francis of Assisi and addressed his brothers and sisters and proposed to them a way of life that marked by the flavor of the gospel. So he said, I would like to select the one in which he calls a love that transcends the barriers of geography and distance and declares blessed all those who love their brother as much as he is far away from him and when he is with him. So the same idea of the encyclical of Pope Francis's encyclical is that same idea of contraction and expansion, which is very interesting to me. And when you look at the ideas around St. Francis, he came up with a very strong rule of life. And that rule was connected to nature. So I graduated with a master's at the Franciscan school, and I so need to go back to it because it's so beautiful. But I listened to one of our sisters this week, but Bill Short is probably one of the top scholars in Franciscan tradition. And we had all of Francis's writings, most of Francis's writings at our school. It was the 12th century. And when you start looking at this lecture I went to last week, she was talking about beauty. And she was talking about the beautiful of Francis's ideas. And my friend Alikiko was talking about nature today, and it was like, so beautiful to be able to align all of this, because the beauty and the idea of beauty is within ourselves and outside of ourselves, right? It's in us and it's out of us. Our heart beats, right? Our heart beats without doing anything, and our heart expands, looking at each other, waving, say hello. This is very practical. So Francis gave this rule of life, and I'm going to probably try to focus on that in the next few weeks, because this idea of the encyclical from Pope Francis and Francis's teaching very much aligns with my work around Jesus and the way of the word and sound. And as we speak, as we develop through good quality understanding, through good quality sound, when we put sugar or expansive foods or too much spice in, it comes out almost as a confusion or a delusion or an expansiveness, right? That we're making chaos. We're not bringing ourselves forward. So the word, the way of life, the way of truth is what Jesus spoke. And he spoke a lot about the word. Most of the disciples wrote about that, if you look at the gospel. And then we come to Muhammad, peace be upon him. And when we think about Muhammad and Islam, I'm only 3.5 years just experiencing it. Really, I listened to my first tech lecture back in 2010. So it's been 10 years of looking at it, but really just concentrated a little bit more in the last 3.5. But I believe that Muhammad set up systems and system change. Because when you read the Quran, he gives ideas on how to live, right? So when you come back to the 21st or the 20th century, the 20th century, we have Gandhi, we have Martin Luther King, we have Michio Kushi, and now we have Pope Francis. I'm watching carefully. We have the Dalai Lama. But as we open ourselves to a deeper sense of relationship or relatedness, and we look towards these 21st or 20th century guides, I like to interpret back, many, many moons ago, because I studied Buddhism as well. So let's read a poem from John Philip Newell. He is a scholar from Scotland. He writes a lot in this book, the Book of Creation, about the harmony, so many different areas, but the wisdom, the wildness of God. And let's read that, and then we'll go back. He said, the goodness of the Celtic tradition deeply affirms the unbounded side of life. It seeks a wild naturalness of place and an untamable energy of power. In the prayers of the Hebrides, the elemental forces of earth, sea, and sky are recognized as potentially destructive. The goodness of their wild energy, however, is invoked. Power of storm, be thine. Power of moon, be thine. Power of sun, be thine. Power of sea, be thine. Power of land, be thine. Power of heaven. And he said, another blessing puts it, thine be the might of the river. Thine be the might of the ocean. The might of victory on field. Thine be the might of fire. Thine be the might of the element. The might of love on high. he's such a prolific, beautiful person. He says, at the same time, the harmony of God is within nature itself as well. And he talks about the grace of love of the skies be thine. The grace of the love of the stars be thine. The grace of the love of the moon be thine. The grace of the love of the sun be thine. When we think about the divine and the wildness, it's that same contraction and expansion. That the wildness is more expansive. The grace is more inward, right? So we're always seeing this in these writings of these different teachings around space and time. And I call it, I was giving the gift of sharing this with a person this last week, and I was talking about timelessness and how much we have to stay into timelessness right now. When we sit into time and we put ourselves into this linear space of time, and we think of science and the linearness of science, we also have to look at the timelessness of science. We have to look at this idea between movement and rest, movement and rest. And it's everywhere around us. So when you think about some of the Franciscan, let's see what we can do. The spirit of prayer and holy devotion. What one of the sisters did last week with this idea of beauty was so beautiful. She said that beauty is something we behold in giving service to the world, and we give service to ourselves, because it's in ourselves that we see the beauty. It's in ourselves that we open to the beauty. The hermitage of Franciscan life had many expressions, Bill says, of renewed interest in forms of contemplation for the life of Francis's day. In the century before Francis, Cistercians, Calmados, and Carthusians had championed the renewal of contemplative life within the monastic tradition. I've studied some with the Calmados, and I did a 40-day silent retreat with St. Bede's tradition, and it was just amazing. But this idea of the contemplative life, let's read a little bit more. The Cistercians reduced the elaborate offer of other monasteries, like Cluny, to a simpler, briefer form. They emphasized silence, poverty, and manual labor, striving for more perfect observance of the rule of St. Benedict. St. Bernard of Clairvaux, William of St. Thierry, and Isaac of Stella were among the early Cistercian authors whose writing on prayer and contemplation had an influence far beyond their own communities, beginning in France. The Carthusians under St. Bruno pursued the ideal of solitary eremitical life, lived in the context of a community. And when we start looking at some of these early forefront of early founders of the traditions of the Catholic tradition where Francis was from, you can start seeing some of this internal formation, right? And so if you study into some of these early foundations, this internal structure and the expansion, the giving service out to the world, is very much part of both of the lives of the Franciscan tradition. So when I was looking at Alex's works today on the spiral of history and how he moves into peaceful societies, he talks about 5 peaceful societies, which is pretty fun. He talks about the Minoans, the Niger River Valley, the Indus Sarasvati, the Norte Chico, and the ancestral Australian. He said those were 5 cultures that lived in harmony with nature. They lived in harmony and they honored the authoritarian. It was before the authoritarian rule, religion, and slavery and war. He said before they all flourished about for 1,000 years, these 5 societies. So I'm really, really excited. I called Alex and I said, this is like the best works, and it feels like so fit into my thesis work that I'm working on beauty and the architecture of your soul. And as you start looking towards yourself, really start thinking about that internal formation. To be able to give service out to the world, you need that sturdy place, that sturdiness that practice gives us, that internal gift. I wrote about the spiral, and many, many years ago, I had a lot of vision when I was in Scotland, actually, about gold and silver. The threads, there's a magnetic thread around the earth, and that magnetic thread is a very powerful vortex of quantitative understanding of vibration. And when you can tap the energy, you can help understand how things are built in these early formation of like pyramids and some of these early things, Stonehenge, how they connected the earth with today's essence. And it wasn't linear. It was more spiralic. It was more spiralarity. It was more, this is why I, really moved into spiralarity. And here's Alex coming out with the book. And so as studying macrobiotic friends, it was so exciting to start looking and delving in. And when I think about Michio and his understanding of quantum physics, he worked with many doctors, and there was a great lecture, many great lectures, but there were many. I remember the lecture on a group of quantum physics type people, and Michio was so phenomenal. I mean, if you look at understanding layers of this great universe, this expansion and contraction, this unifying principle, the idea that everything around us is either expanding or contracting. I think if we just think of the fractal, how water, I'm sure many of you have seen water. And when you think good thoughts, the fractals are very powerfully, beautifully designed. And when you think negative thoughts, they're very distraught and not shaped or formed. The universe right now, where we are living, feels like that. It's not formed, and it's like it's a dysfunctional, fractized world. And I think about this a lot because I'm like, what can we do to make a difference? What can we as a nature of ourselves be? So, a spirograph. Have you seen those spinning spirographs? They spin, but they turn like the earth kind of turns, but it's even different. It's very powerful. And energy is like this. Energy and vibration and understanding of how energy moves is exactly like that. So that's what I've been working on today. he talks about the clock and how it's moved over time. And the Mayan tradition, for the last 6 months, I've been studying with, some of the Mayan elders, and also Mark Lund. He has an amazing understanding of the Mayan calendar in different, how it moves and how quantum relationship to the calendar moves energy. And so when we're looking at even the idea of time and timelessness, this idea of spiralarity has to come from a quantitative gyrograph, a gyrograph of time, timelessness. It can't just come from this idea of just the clock. It's 11 o'clock and we've got to get to a meeting. It has to come from this. And, it's funny, being with, I did a sweat lodge a couple of weeks ago, and I'm going to do another one next week. And I'm excited about it because it transcends time. Sweat lodges, you transcend time. You have to transcend time in order to deal with the heat. And it's the same with birth, when you're giving birth to a child, or it's the same with somebody transitioning at death. And when you go through these transformations, no matter if it's going through somebody dying in your own personal life or a birth of the baby, the mystic of time and timelessness disappears. Anyone that's had a baby, it's about 3 or 4 weeks before you kind of come back into your body a little bit, because it's like such a powerful entity of life's force. And I think there's a few things that came up this week. For one, Alex talked about rice, and he talked about a really cool thing that I hadn't heard of. He talks it awns. They're the long hairs that extend from the heads of cereal grains growing in the field. He said they're like antennas. They gather and absorb the waves and vibrations of the cosmos, including the sun, the moon, stars, and distant galaxies. And I had taught a lot about this back when I was at Kripalu. I trained Kripalu Yoga Center in grains and beans. And when you think about the antennas, in the native tradition, our hair is an antenna. And that's why many people grow their hair and don't cut it in different traditions. And it's very powerful to understand the grains. And I was out at the beach all day today. I spent the day at the ocean reading this book and writing and painting. If you just came on, I'll show you my little painting I made. It's just kind of fun little watercolor. And I really want to paint more. And I'm reading out of a couple of different books, Poverty and Joy from William Short, a Franciscan, and I'm reading about a Celtic tradition, and I'm reading about the spiral of history through Alex Jack, and this is the one I'm really focused on with you tonight. But when you think about these awns, being at the ocean today made me look around, and I'm reading the book. I read very slow, just so you know. I'm a very slow reader. Somebody's making comments. Hi, Mushtaq. Nice to see you. When you think about the antennas of energy out at the beach, where the charge comes in from the ocean, the grasses are very charged, more heaven and earth's force, very powerful. And the grasses are like antennas of energy. And if you can open to the antenna of your own consciousness, the antenna of your own presence, the antenna of your own idea of presence, you'll really start understanding energy much greater. So that the expansion, contraction is in everything. So when you're eating whole grains, I was at Kripalu Yoga Center. I'd already been eating really well for many years, and I trained Kripalu Yoga Center. It's the largest vegetarian kitchen in North America back in 1993. And a lot of people were into the raw food diet. Now, a lot of raw food diet tends to eat small baby food. Like the plants grow, maybe about an inch. And if you're a gardener, if the wind comes and you've got baby plants outside, they blow over, right? But the grasses, like, brown rice or wheat or oats, they've gone through the wind and the rain. And that's kind of what Alex is saying. He's opening up this idea that the awns, the grains, have been in formation. And it's kind of like us. We have to be in formation in order to be upright and sturdy in a society that right now is very chaotic, right? COVID has made everything almost slowed down, but almost it's this timelessness of energy, this timelessness of life force that is moving in such a timeless way. So formation right now for yourselves and for me and for all of us as adults is so key. It's so important to look at your own personal formation. So when I look at Holy Wisdom, Holy Word, and I look at some of the ideas, the antennas, they gather and absorb the waves and vibrations of the cosmos, including the sun, the moon, the stars, and distant galaxies. Eating heirloom barley, wheat, rice, and other awned grains strengthens the will, enhances the intuition, and attunes to universal awareness. This is what we learned when we were working with Michio and Aveline. The idea of practice, we did so many different practices, and as I come out into the world and teach for the last 3.5 years again, it's been really nice because I stayed underground for a long time, but it's been really beautiful to open to this book today, because I went very, very slow, and I made remarks, and I'm going to give Alex some ideas of what I think about this linear idea versus a spiralic idea, and how beauty stands in the midst of the center of timelessness in between them. There's a timelessness that we have to capture as human beings. We have to capture this idea. Otherwise, we are in this linear age of science, and we're not capturing the spiritual flow of that idea of harmonizing ourselves as human beings, harmonizing our presence to God, harmonizing our essence, harmonizing our relationships, harmonizing our relatedness, harmonizing our ideas of beauty. Nature gives us that beauty. As much as the sun goes up and the sun comes up, the sun goes down, the sun goes up. This is contraction, expansion, right? Back to this idea. But there's a timelessness in that cross-quarter time. There's a timelessness in the cross-quarter mystery of time, which is timelessness. There's a silence within the form of, if you watch the sun go down, I was very carefully, I don't know if you're going to be able to see I took some amazing photos out at the beach. I had such a great time. So beautiful tonight. I think, you won't be able to see it, I guess, but you can kind of see it. right? It's hard to see. I'll try to post them. I don't think you can. There you go. You can see a little bit of the sunset. But when there's that sense of awe, when there's that sense of that awness of nature, there's an awe, right? We just get the sense of nature. We get this mystery of nature. That's that internal same awe when you practice, when you spiritually open to the timelessness of practice. So the beauty of service out into the world and that inner core of internal timelessness, both of those give beauty within us. And it's that presence of love, which I would call timeless. It's that presence of love that is just within the heart of the human. It's that presence of love that's the heart that makes you feel alive with that love. And isn't it precious that we have that? Isn't it precious that we bring together the human heart, the human exploration of the human heart? And isn't it precious that our words express the human heart? The beautiful poems of Rumi, the beautiful speakings of like Martin Luther King, I had a dream, right? It's such a gift. And if we miss that right now on the fallen ears of children, they're only going to get that chaos. And the chaos is what we're giving the next generations. If we're talking only about politics or only about COVID or only about the linear world. If you have children, teach them it's okay to do practice in a deep way. The silence of the presence of sound. You know, a candle, when you light a candle and you stare into the candle, Steiner did this, Michio did a lot of training around the light of the fire. It's the natural, fire is a natural element, just like the sun is fire energy. The water, the fire, the air, the earth, when they're connected and we're connected to those elements, we are in relationship with ourselves because it's a natural order. So when you stare into a candle, you know, I highly recommend before you eat a meal just to light a candle and then just take a moment. So you're nurturing what goes in from a quieter place. So let's go back to what else I wrote. This is what I've been writing today on Alex's book and kind of daydreaming into my page of spiralarity because I've been working on this as well. He talks about 3 orbits. I got into ever-ending evolution. Evolution is not linear. And I think this is where we get stuck with science. When I work with clients and coach people and develop my relationship with people, I open this idea of ancestors, but I do it from a point of now, and I do it from a point of understanding relational evolution. Um, and I got really excited about that. I got really excited because I was cracking up with one of my macrobiotic male friends, Joel, the other day, and we were just like, I was laughing so hard. And I was talking about the extreme of my extremities. And the extremities out into the world, if you put your antennas out into the world right now, it's extreme. The extreme of my extremities. And I got laughing so hard. I couldn't stop laughing. And I just said it. He said, that is really funny. I said, there needs to be a book written around the extreme of extremities right now, because it's like, it's almost comical of watching this great universe right now. It's very sad at the same time, and it's very painful. But if we can open to the extremes and realize that evolutionally, Alex talks a lot in the book about the linearized. I was talking about some of the work that he was saying, and I wrote today about linearized. It's kind of a long word that I don't even know if it is a word. Linearized words. Linearized. So if we're linear words are not linear. We take them in this world as linear. We think that they're linear. They're not linear. The oral cultures of our time versus written part of our time, very different. And that's why it's so good to study languages, because some of the old ancient languages give us that timelessness of just speaking. There were many ideas that Michio talked about on sound and the vibration of sound and how important it is to practice sound, because it gives you, he said, heaven and earth meet in the uvula, the little uvula in the back of our mouth, the little, it's called the uvula in English. I don't know what it would be called in Urdu. But heaven and earth meet there. And he said, when you're chewing well, when you're taking care of your health, including sound, and he gave us many different sound. I think the vibrational world around you that surrounds you, this idea that air touches your face right now, you're held up by gravity, right? Gravity is air in its essence, but it's really vibrational energy that helps us here. This is kind of funny, but vibration versus linear, I was also thinking oral versus written, vibration versus linear. The linearized words, how we take words in. When you're doing your practice, you'll take words in differently. If you're practiced, you'll take words much, much more with a grain of salt, because you can understand the words of another human being in a different modality, in a different moral compass, I would say. I talked a lot last week about moral compass. When you think about the moral compass of each of us, today I was talking about moral and spirit. I was talking about beauty and nature. And I was talking about extensions and how the vibrational world gathers energy. And so that's kind of what I came up with in today's moments at the beach. I'd read a couple paragraphs and then I'd ponder. But I thought it was important to share, because I think we're at a crossroad with the whole COVID thing, with the whole understanding of COVID, with the whole understanding of relationships. And if we just see COVID as linear and don't see it from a different view, I think you have to start looking at the beauty and spiralarity of all of your personal life. Because when you expand your understanding, it's ever ending. Evolution is ever ending. It never has a beginning. It doesn't have an end. It's always here. And like this moment, we're just here in this moment together. We won't have another moment like this. And if you can bring your compass, your straight and linear thinking compass, to a much greater wholeness in that beautiful nature that you are, that beautiful presence of timelessness that you are, that beautiful spirit that you are, your fabric, your internal fabric, your internal practice will really help understand and help you understand a non-judgment to the world. So I hope you enjoyed Holy Wisdom, Holy Word tonight. It might be a little confusing, but I've really had quite a long, precious day. And started out with going to the pumpkin patch with my grandkids, and then going out to the ocean and spending time with myself, reading and pondering and watching nature and meditating and playing with my dog and running in the beach and running in the waves. And oh my gosh, it was so much fun. It's a great day. So I hope you have a beautiful day. I hope you have a beautiful presence today to you. And remember that contraction, expansion, inward expression of yourself and giving service to the world, an evolution of your ancestors and expression out into the world, the centralized center of your core in the outer expression of your core. It's all around you, and you are timeless. And I hope you can bring the timelessness into this day, no matter where you are, what time of day it is. I hope you can just be in that simplicity of timelessness. Adonai. Blessings. May you bring this journey of love and light into your full expression of yourself. Have a beautiful day. Have a beautiful evening. Peace and best.